The Rings of Power, Amazon's hotly anticipated TV show, which has pretty much been judged as an absolute failure before it even launched, is finally upon us, and I'm disappointed. Because it's not even so bad it's funny, it's just a thing that exists. It flops on the floor like a dying fish out of water in front of me, and it tries to get my sympathy by going like, hey, do you remember, like, Elrond and Galadriel, like Lord of the Rings stuff? And all I see is a little fish thing, dying slowly.
Yeah, there's not a lot that sets the show apart that makes it rather interesting to watch. In fact, I can safely say after we just binged it with our friend Dev that, like, after 2 hours of, runtime, apathy was the main feeling, I think, generally.
In large part because nothing has happened. We've watched 2 hours worth of video now, and the greatest advancement in the story is Galadriel, who is the only one, and I called this the moment I saw her fucking character. She is the only one that knows that Sauron is still around, and nobody believes her. All of the men are like, Galadriel, stupid woman. The war is over, everything is fine, to the point that her company, even just after fighting an ice troll, which Galadriel kills single-handedly, and the eating of Galadriel is... it's real. It's an actual scene. Galadriel steps on a sword and is then hurled through the air to kill a troll. But after this, all of the other elves just go like, fuck this, and just literally lay down their weapons around her.
We're going home, Galadriel, despite all the evidence, because we don't believe you.
Like, literally, the opening sequence is just Galadriel being like, listen, I know he's still alive, but he's not. We're not in the right place. Look, there's his tower right over there. Okay, fine. Look, there's his sigil. It's very old, though. But it's right there. It's guarded by an ice troll. No, he won't go home. Oh... Even as she, of course, is the only one who can climb the ice wall quickly. She walks at the head of the column, never faltering. Ah, God. Literally, her men are holding her back.
Yep, those white men, pesky little things. One of them falls to the ground and is injured, and she's like, come on, hurry up already. I need my story to progress. And then she goes back and pretends to sort of help him and spits at him a little, like, bleh.
It is...
Also, the ice troll fight scene, that was funny. The elves are getting their asses kicked. Then Galadriel shows up, pokes it a few times, and falls over dead.
Yep, nice and quick. And after this, she goes back home to Elendil, where Gil-galad, who is played by the only elf with at least semi-long hair, goes, right, go home now, you're being a bit of a bother here. And after glaring at him for a bit, she goes like, okay, fine. Then they head to the west, heading into heaven, essentially. The gates open up, they glow, angels. And she looks at the light and goes, no, and begins swimming home.
Well, she jumps off the boat, and then, like, as the light disappears, she looks around, swimming in the water, like, I guess I'll start swimming back to Middle Earth, and she just starts paddling. It's like, okay, I guess she's gonna swim across the entirety of the sea.
That is the only good scene in the entire 2 hours, just Galadriel leaping off the fucking boat, mid-Atlantic, and just like, doggy paddle.
But don't worry. When the show first starts, it establishes Galadriel's relationship to, was it her older brother?
Yeah, I forgot about him. Finrod exists for about 30 seconds, dies, and then Galadriel's like, brother, I knew you so well. I must go on an epic quest to avenge you.
They also foreshadow his death in the 2 minutes that he's actually on screen.
I think 2 minutes is... Oh, God. And the opening scene, too, where Galadriel makes a little paper boat, which turns into a swan. And the other kids sink it, and... not only is that It's the symbolism is painful enough in and of itself. But you know what pisses me off most about that scene? It is the fact that, again, and I've been harping on about this, about Lord of the Rings so much, Rings of Power, more correctly. The elves are not elves, they're just random humans. There is nothing elven about them, there's nothing ephemeral, nothing ethereal. They're just Californians on a set somewhere.
Yep, they come off as very human, and sometimes when the dialogue sounds Tolkien-esque, they start to act elven, but the minute they start switching over to the more Amazon stories, they just very much recede back into that human pacing.
See, I did point that out when we were talking to Dev and Lilith, because it's very interesting. When they're talking regularly, they're talking as if they normally would. Like, they occasionally put in a word which makes it sound like, oh, tidings, that's an old-timey word, right? We'll put that in there, because it'll sound epic. But when they try to pronounce a actual name, or a place of a name, like Morgoth, for example, their tone changes and their pronunciation changes. It's really jarring, and it makes it very clear that the rest of the story isn't Lord of the Rings. Because they must change up their entire speaking pattern to pronounce a word that it sounds foreign. It sounds strange. They strain the R's on everything. It's not Morgoth, it's Morgoth.
Yup. But that makes it sound more old-timey, as it were.
And here's the thing too, if they wanted to do that, there's a way to do it. Like Spartacus did this fantastically well, where all of the actors were constantly speaking in this pseudo old-timey speak, using archaic language. Like, whenever they would say something like motherfucker, for example, instead of that they would like mother humper or something, and it would be just small changes, but they were constant. They were in every piece of dialogue. Here, however, they pick out one or two semi-archaic sounding words occasionally and just toss it in.
Yeah, it just feels like an absolute mess. The overall dialogue structure, not just with the elves, is generally kind of just all over the place. The Harfoots, totally not hobbits. I think the only time I heard the dialogue feel kind of somewhat a little bit more natural was when we get to the dwarves and Elrond interaction with the dwarves. I think that was probably the highlight of the entire show so far.
All right, yeah. So the only part I can actually praise was, weirdly enough, Disa, the black dwarven princess. Because she comes across as incredibly bubbly and friendly and open, even as Durin is trying to be a bit of a stick in the mud because he's insulted at Elrond's transgressions, even as he's trying to keep his father's secrets. It is actually a fairly nice story, because, and a large part of it is because the dwarves look like effing dwarves. They've got their big noses, they've got their beard. None of the dwarven females have beards, by the way, because they had to work in one middle finger there anyways.
Yeah, of course. But that is, like, her performance actually surprised me. Originally I was like, God, her eyes are weird. And they are weird. Like, it's like a weird orangey hue to them. And she has a little bit of the sideburns, but it's like they pussied out. They didn't do the beard, which was a big letdown. But the overall sets and the CG they worked into the dwarves, where you can actually see how the light gets down to the caves, and you can start to see like how they what kind of agriculture they do. There's some interesting stuff there, and I actually thought that was kind of cool. A little touch of world building. That's also the only time we see that in the entirety of the show, though.
Precisely, like the only setting that seems to have a glimmer of soul are the dwarves. Like, the dwarves they've got their heavy accents, you know, the dwarfish accent, Scottish Northern, Scotty Northern. They're speaking like that, they look correct, they are in deep dwarven halls, there's world building in the background, like they've got mirrors reflecting the light, which is a nice touch from the Lord of the Rings movies, and it also makes sense. You're deep in the mountain, you need to get light down there somehow, so you use reflectors. Okay. They've got agriculture to feed people, they've got lifts and elevators. It has more than just the window dressing. Meanwhile, the elves are just yellow forest, yellow forest, yellow forest.
Yep.
And the Harfoots are just hobos. Just hobos. Dirty hobos.
Living in their little commune. They got dirt in their hair. They got dirt all over their faces. They're muddy. They're grimy. And they're also migratory, but yeah, for some reason they settle down to farm. Don't worry about it. But it just comes across as sort of sloppy. And then there's these Southerners. Oh my goodness. They're just generic feudal villages.
That's the worst part here. Like, okay.
That's the bad part.
One of the big problems with the show is it has too many storylines that are too uninteresting. We've got 2 hours to tell a story here. And we've got Black Elf, Arondir's storyline. We've got Elrond's storyline. We've got Galadriel's storyline. And we've got the Harfoot's storyline. So in reality, we don't have 2 hours to tell a story. We've got, like, half an hour. And that's what we get. Half an hour of 4 stories. None of which advance anywhere. None of which go anywhere. None of which set anything up.
They're going so slow. And in these 2 episodes, like, let's just talk about Elrond's story. Elrond, like, what does he do? He goes to Lindon, and then he's like, oh, here's Celebrimbor. All right, we're going to take you and Celebrimbor to the Dwarves. And then I know, hold on. They walk all the way, and they walk to the Dwarven stronghold. And when they get there, like, he knocks on the door, and they're like, no, go away, we don't want to talk to you. And then he's like, I invoke the challenge of Derp. And then they're like, okay, we'll let you in. Also, Celebrimbor, I know you're this great smith and all, but you're going to have to walk back by yourself. It's like, you walked all the way up there just to take Celebrimbor up there, just so Celebrimbor can walk all the way back? Like, oh my god.
It was my second favorite scene. Like, my favorite scene is Galadriel just going like, nope, and yeeting herself off the boat.
That was funny.
It's just such an action of absolute unplanning. It's not even that it isn't planned, it's unplanning. It is the antithesis of anything. And there's Celebrimbor and Elrond. They walk to Khazad-dûm. It must have taken them weeks on foot. No escort, no carriages, no nothing. Eating barks and berries, I guess. And like you said, when they arrive, Elrond goes in and just turns to Celebrimbor and walk back, please. What?
Sorry, I'm gonna do this by myself. And Celebrimbor's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not really miffed about having to, trek for, a good 100 few miles.
It's only a 2-week walk. I guess I'll get started.
Well, see if you catch up.
It's so stupid. Like, at least if there was a carriage, they'd be like, yeah, that was a wasted fucking trip. But no, on foot. And now he's got to go back alone. Like,
Celebrimbor, this not totally at all important or influential elf is walking unaccompanied across open terrain. And also the king, Gil-galad, they know that there's still Orky Borkies about. They know that there's still some bad stuff about. So Celebrimbor is going unaccompanied across that land. Like, it's a little thing that happens in the show, and they don't pay no mind to it. But the implications of the carelessness of the elves here is just laughable.
The show can't make up its mind if this is a peaceful world or a dangerous one, because Galadriel, after having swum for like 2 days, come across just a wreck in the middle of the Atlantic, miles away from anything, because they had to find some way to save her, I guess. And they're like,
be swimming for a while.
There be corsairs in these waters. Corsairs? Who's fucking corsairs? These are Númenórean waters. The elves have won. The War of Wrath was 100 years ago. Who the fuck are these pirates?
Don't worry, they're pirates. But it's okay, it's just a giant fish monster.
Oh yeah, there's a fish monster too, is it? Like, nom.
Yep, just eats the people. There's a great scene where
person, and then ignores the rest.
Yep. Also, there's a great scene where later there's a storm brewing, and Galadriel ties herself to the ship, and she looks to the human man on the ship and is like, "Bind yourself to me!" And he's like, "No." And then she falls overboard and sinks because she bound herself to the ship like a muppet.
I was literally sitting there saying, like, you're tying yourself to wreckage. This is going to end badly, and so it did.
And it actually does. And so he dives into the water to save her, right?
Yep, he does pull her up.
Yeah, doesn't haul her up. But as they get up the water, she's already awake and conscious and helps him up.
Yep. Like, she's unconscious, being dragged under. He dives after her to free her. She breaks the surface first. And then is just
He then helps him up, yep. It's like, actually, I was totally okay, and also, I'm the real hero, not you. We have to show that I'm the one saving you.
It's
okay, Joe.
So dumb.
All right, Joe.
But that's just stupid. Like, there's also pointlessness. Arondir, the Black Elf, who is the least elf person I've ever seen in my life. Short, cropped, black hair and everything. His storyline is just so pointless right now. He's in the middle of nowhere, in the Southlands, mind you. Like, this is the area that in the modern day Lord of the Rings is like the borderlands of Rune, right? And there's a little sleepy old-time English village populated by white people. And I'm sitting there like, unironically, these would be the brown people, or at the very least Asian looking, but no. I'm like, these are white people. Why? Like, you can actually make Southlanders that look correct.
Let us not forget that one of the young boys, who's probably his son, because he has a relationship with one of the human women, because we have to put in that interracial relationship checkbox, is monkeying around in a barn and a floorboard and finds Sauron's sword underneath a barn floorboard. Just randomly, because the plot demands and the plot needs him to find it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what's this weird Sauron sword? Oh, that's pretty neat.
Theo is probably the reason why this storyline exists, because his name, as I mentioned, means God in Greek, and he is very clearly a plot-relevant character. Now, I think you're probably right, too, because Arondir and Bronwyn have puppy eyes at each other, and Arondir mentioned that you're the only one who's been nice to me. Everyone's a racist, which is another point, too. Everyone is racist to the elves for reasons. Like, it's never explained.
Really
They're like, you're
that.
kind here. Yeah.
They're like, you pointy-eared gets you. And then they're like, they don't know what to say, like, pointy-eared get. It's like, okay.
Like, why are you racist against the elves?
They're like, our king left because of you, Herbica Durka Dirk. And I was like, who's your king again? They're like, I'm not going to clarify, not going to elaborate. We're just going to roll past this and pretend that that's good enough.
The only thing is the elves are technically kind of occupying the area, looking out for, like, evil and shit. But they've just got a watchtower. Like, do they have a civilization? Do they raise taxes? Do they levy tithes? Are they oppressive? Like, why do we ever... And it's not just the Southlands. The people on the other end of the earth, the people floating on the raft in the de facto Atlantic, they're too like, elves. Oof, elves.
Like, everybody kind of hates the elves in this show.
It's weird.
I mean... Versus if you think about Lord of the Rings, like everyone's like, oh, elves are so magical. Now I get that the third age, the elves have begun to leave, but at the same time, it's very weird that there's this massive hatred of the elves. And hold on, we need to back up real quick. So there's a watchtower with the wardens, right? That's what they're doing in the Southlands, looking out for evil. There is a cow that they find that comes in and is like, oh, my cow's sick. And the woman that's interested in the dude who probably had the kid with that one elven dude is like, oh, what's wrong with the cow? And so they squirt its milk, and its milk comes out like black ichor, which is, well, bit evil. Bit evil.
Which is the point at which Arondir should have gone like, this looks like a task for the Watchtower garrison. But no. Instead, he takes the woman and goes, let's walk a few 100 kilometers to the nearby village and see if it's safe.
Yep. And not only that, but they stumble into basically it's all under attack, right? And so he's like, you go and get help. I'm going to go into the tunnels. It's like, why are you going into the tunnels? Like, this force wiped out this village. Should you not go and warn the other watchers? Why are you acting independently? Like, aren't you going to, like, hey, there is evil here, actually. No, he just got to do it himself because the character's a blithering idiot.
And it's not like he's going to achieve anything. Like, why is he going in the tunnels? Like, what?
What are you going to do down there? Wipe out all, like, 1 million orcs? Good luck.
It's pointless. Not to mention, he could probably move a hell of a lot faster than Bronwyn. Like, Bronwyn's some backwater village apothecary. Adonde is a trained elf soldier. Like, he could run back to the garrison, no issues, and be like, okay, so there's fucking goblin caves over here. And the best part of Bronwyn, she's being sent back. Does she go to the garrison? No. She goes to the bar.
And what happens? The very same plot that Galadriel had, not like only an episode ago, where they're like, silly woman, we don't believe you. So then she treks back to her house, finds that her son is basically in hiding. They defeat an orc. She then comes back, slams the orc on the table, and is like, I'm a strong, independent woman. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, it's exactly the same story as Galadriel, which pisses me off, because he's like, there's evil out there, and the evil menfolk are like, no, there's no evil out there, so he has to go and find the evidence. Also, Theo, the orcs know he's one of theirs or something, because he was hiding in that little thing. You can see the claw marks above the door. The orc knew he was in there, and he found his mother almost immediately. Like, the orc was never going to attack Theo. Theo is not the red herring, but like, he's evil. He's fucking evil. Or
Theo also has Sauron's blade too at that point.
Yes, and his blood flows into the blade, and the blade begins to regenerate. Like, the problem here is they're setting up like multiple Saurons, which is really confusing, because there's the Stranger who lands in the Halffootlands, who is literally called the Stranger in the fucking subtext, which makes me feel like that's a red herring, because like, that's too obvious. And then you've got Theo, who has a sword of Sauron, who can feed the sword, who doesn't get attacked by the orcs, and has no ill effect of holding the sword of Sauron.
Yeah, they're setting up multiple things because they want to throw you for a loop. I have half a mind to say that the wizard dude who fell from the stars is too obvious, and that he's a wizard sent down. Like, maybe he's like Saruman or something.
No, like, because all the wizards arrived at the same time, and that arrived in the Third Age, and they arrived specifically via boat, because they were sent by the,
I know that, but remember, this isn't canon. Like, this show, they couldn't do things the same way. So I feel like they're just sort of making shit up. I mean, there's several points that they've made stuff up, like Galadriel doing everything she did is not canon. 90%, actually, everything that's happened is actually not canon in this show.
Yeah, but like, this is too on the nose, I feel like. It can't be that.
Part of me thinks it is, but we'll find out. I mean, we'll see.
Now, he could be, he could be a Maiar, maybe, but that'd be stretching it too, like a lot.
I mean, this show is stretch. This show having Galadriel swim back was a bit from Valinor was a bit special.
It's a bit of a stretch.
And the fact that she makes it is even funnier. Oh goodness.
And I also hate the fact that they're talking about Sauron at all, and I want to point out too, Galadriel had no idea that Sauron was back, because they're forgetting about the events of the Necromancer. Right? There was literally the story of the Hobbit, because the Necromancer was known as this great evil, but they had no idea it was Sauron. And yet here in the show,
know who it was.
Everyone knows it sounds like, even Gil-galad and Elrond is after they've sent Galadriel away, it's like, yeah, she's probably right, it's probably Sauron.
Yeah, the characters are very kind of convinced already. They did a much better job. See, even though the Hobbits weren't the best movies, like, the whole Necromancer plot was probably much better, even though it wasn't that good, and then they sort of give it away at the end, but whatever. The show just has no real magic to it. The sets, some of them are passable. The designs for the armors and stuff, especially on the elves, they're really bad. Especially the Warden elves. Like, they got these like wooden breastplates that just look dumb. It just feels kind of cheap, even, despite the budget, obviously.
Very, very silly. Because again, like, if they couldn't recognize him as the Necromancer, there's no way they can recognize him now. Especially as every one of them have convinced themselves that he's totally gone. Oh god, the elves too. There's so many things that just the little things, right? The fact that none of the elves have long hair. Like, I think Gil-galad might be the only elf with long hair. Everyone else has short or at best medium-length hair.
Yeah, which is kind of strange because in the Peter Jackson films, they all had that long flowing hair that was described by Tolkien's books. Fair-skinned, almost heavenly divine-like.
It's just a casual middle finger. It's like not giving the dwarf women any beards at all. It's just this casual disregard for the universe.
And it's like, they researched this crap, but they chose actively to ignore it. It's like the elves in the presentation. They have not, like, if you watch the Peter Jackson films and you look closely again, you'll notice that the elves have this glowing heavenly effect to make them almost ethereal or to give this otherworldly vibe to them. In this show, you have none of that. Even down to their cities feels very kind of plain, There's no really effect to it. It's just not very good. It feels
just people.
Like a knockoff of Lord of the Rings, honestly.
It has no soul, and that is pretty much what I predicted to begin with, that it would have no soul. It's got the window dressing, it's got the names, it occasionally even has stuff that looks Lord of the Rings, like the little clasp that all of the elves wear on their cloaks, the little leaf clasp, for example. All of them have that.
Which is a nice touch, because they had that in the other series. But the thing is, like, it's just not very good. Like, the whole thing is it's all flawed. Down to the outfits, down to the like, some of the actors I will say were good. Like, I was surprised by the princess lady. Like, the Dwarven princess, she surprised me. Her performance there, like, actually kind of won me over. But by and large, like, the actors can't really pull this one together, and the directing is weird. So we have a scene, by the way, when Galadriel's on the raft, and she's tugging on a rope that's attached to a piece of wood, and she's pretending to do something with it. But as you watch that scene, if you pay attention, she's just tugging the rope back and forth and wiggling it in her hands. And it's so obviously noticeable because they're like, what are you doing? You're on a wrecked raft. Like, what are you doing with that rope? Are you tying the wood together? And she's just pulling on it. She's just actually pulling on it, tugging it. It looks ridiculous.
Well, the director was literally standing at the edge of the little pool they're in whilst they're doing this and going like, so Galadriel needs to take charge, do some sailing-y stuff. And it's like, there's no sailor. This is just a raft. Do something. And so she's just standing there. She's kind of twirled a rope around a log, and now she's tugging it. It makes
I
no
don't know
sense.
what I'm doing. Like, is this what you want me to do, Mr. Director Man? It's like, that's perfect.
That looks like you're taking charge. No one will understand that you're just tugging on a log. And again,
oh my god.
None of these characters are memorable. None of these characters have any gravitas on screen. There are no Aragorns here. There are no Legolases. The closest we get is a Gimli, in that Durin and Disa are actually doing pretty well. And they're only doing well because they're the only characters that look like what they're supposed to portray. Like, Durin looks like a dwarf as established by the Lord of the Rings. He behaves like a dwarf as established by the Lord of the Rings. Meanwhile, Elrond is... Again, like, he doesn't look elven. He just looks like a dude who's in a set.
Yep. Like, the actor himself, the guy playing Elrond, is actually doing a pretty good job, especially with the Dwarven scene when he's, with his friend there, and they have an interaction, this sort of bromance-y moment, and that's actually really well done. But again, the problem is, Elrond, the guy, I don't remember the guy's name, the actor who's playing Elrond, is doing a good job. They don't give him anything to work with, nor do they touch up his, look or aesthetic. Because I think if they touched up his aesthetic, I think it would probably click a lot more. Again, but because they do nothing with it.
Something as goddamn fucking simple as to give them all hair extensions would do a lot of work. Because it would set them apart from just regular goddamn humans.
It would definitely make a difference. But the unfortunate thing is, I think, and the more I think about this show, is they're trying, like they said before, they're writing it for a modern era. The whole thing feels like it's written for a modern era. If this was some generic like fantasy show, it probably would do okay. But the fact that they spent $1 billion on this and $250 million to get the rights to write a TV show set in the Lord of the Rings universe, and this is the best they can do, is just it's all right. Like, it's kind of mediocre. Its biggest failing is that it's forgettable.
It's terribly paced. It's incredibly underwhelming. It has no magic. If you're watching the Lord of the Rings movies, every scene is infused with magic. It's colored correctly, like when they're walking through Cirith Ungol and the Shelob's cave. Everything is dark, everything is cold, everything is frigid, like it's a bad environment, it's disconcerting. When you're in the Shire, everything is bright and bubbly and beautiful. Here, everything is shot in the exact same lighting. It's just this boring... It's not as cold and grey as House of Dragons, but it's not warm either. It's not inviting. It's not magical. It's just a set somewhere in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's very true. God, I can remember the Two Towers when they go to like the Rohan, the Kingdom of Rohan, and the Rohirrim lands. How cool they looked with the rolling hills and the rocky face steep cliff faces and stuff like that. Like, it felt so magical in those scenes. And this is shot in the same area, but they do nothing with the camera working here. Like, there's no... Like, the establishing shots are not bad. Like, CGI-wise, I'm sure they worked those poor CG artists to death in those workhouses. But at the same time, all these CG shots really tell me is that they just blew their money on these CG shots when they should have been more clever, rather than just spending money for the sake of spending money, you know?
The camera work it is sloppy and it is uninspired, and it overuses the undershot awfully. Like, that swooping underneath, looking up at the character shot is used near constantly, even on the hobbits, which makes them... Well, again, look like just fucking people.
You mean the Harfoots? But yes, the basic hobbits, the Harfoot hobbit things. Oh my god. So they are just like dirty hobbitses, and they look like normal people, and there's really kind of just nothing special about them other than the fact that they all look gross and dirty.
Yeah. They're gross and dirty, or hobos.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to look at them. Every time the story goes to them, I'm like, oh god, like, I don't care, please. And then it shows you them being gross and icky and existing, and it's just like...
Eating snails, like, yeah, fun.
Eating berries randomly, giggling, like, we're so happy-go-lucky, we're such a weird, quirky people. It's like, oh my god, please. They're trying to recreate the hobbits, but they're failing so bad here, it's actually painful.
It is not so bad that it is funny. That's kind of the problem too. It is exactly what I expected it to be. It is just a soulless work of television, filled with a bunch of actors who probably have good intentions, but they have no idea what they're doing. They're reading half-formed scripts, trying... Like, it sounds like they are attempting to be poetic and Tolkien-y, yet never managing it.
Yep, they can't quite pull it off. And I think the actors they've actually pulled for the show are very talented, but the writing team has absolutely dropped the ball by undermining Tolkien's lore and not understanding it, and also attempting to subvert it. Actually, I think it might be the latter. I think it's more subversive. They're trying to make it modern. They're putting diversity characters everywhere for the sake of diversity, and it just doesn't feel like Tolkien. It feels very hollow, very corporate, as we mentioned earlier, soulless.
Yeah, because again, you've got characters who are just randomly there. Like, again, you've got a little Englander village in the Southlands, except for that one black person who shows up on camera once, who's like, by the way, we're a multiracial society. Like there shouldn't even be white
society. People. The elves, they do that. The Southlanders, they do that. Where there's like random with it. They do it with the dwarves, the hobbits. Every culture. Like, I guarantee you, when we get to the third episode next week, the Númenóreans are next.
I think that might actually be part of the reason why it's so soulless. Because here's the thing. Okay, this is a bit of a half-formed thought that I might have to expand upon later again, because here's the thing. What is magic? What is fantasy? It is something different than our world. It is something aside, very clearly aside, because we don't have magic. We don't have elves. We don't have dwarves. It is different. So what happens when you try to make fantasy look like reality? You kill the magic. By making the elves look like regular people, you turned them into regular people. There is no fantasy there. There is no magic there, because it's just us.
Yep, with pointy ears.
Yeah, with
that's
makeup.
Not very interesting. Like, I don't want to... When I go to a fantasy world, when we go to an escapism place, we want to see, like, aliens or, elves and dwarves. I don't want the dwarves and elves to behave, they're just like us. Like, that's just boring. I can already do that just by walking outside. I don't need to do that as our escapism, too. They've demystified Tolkien's universe with this show. And that is a sin of itself. What happened, Birch?
Kyle, you were supposed to keep speaking while somebody had notes. Dumbass.
Oh no! There's a pause there. See, I was like waiting for your follow-up because it was putting you up there. Well, now you're keeping that in. You're keeping this in. We're keeping this in.
Now I've had one of those eureka moments. Like, I'm gonna have to think on this more, because I think I'm onto something there. Like, I think that diversity is the death of fantasy. Just straight up, because the moment you reflect our real world in a fantasy setting, it is no longer a fantasy setting. It's the fucking street I walk to the shop.
Yep, and they took away the era too. Like, the magic isn't there. The elves here. The elves, I think, are the biggest kick in the balls. And I think that boils down to the fact that the elves themselves, they were so ethereal in the other Lord of the Rings, and in every other form of media, they're always portrayed as these sort of like, yes, proud, and even, yes, arrogant people, but they had something magical about them that made them otherworldly. And that we don't have. They're too human. They have all the same human flaws we have, and by doing that, they're no longer unique.
There is no longer anything special about them.
And that's just kind of cancer. This whole show has been an undermining of mythos. And that's actually something to tie back to actually what Tolkien wrote. Because his whole thing was about creating a mythos of itself, a mythological world that had these great, grand ideas. And somehow this show manages to undermine all of those things, all of those themes.
Not the show, Kyle. It's actually quite an achievement. Like, this whole rich world, this incredible mythos, this timeless story. Well, Jeff Bezos has managed to reach back into time, grab Tolkien by the balls, and crush this timeless story into a modern-day cosplay fest.
A part of me actually disagrees with that. Because the thing is, this story... Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's story, is timeless. This show will be forgotten in time. It will be not remembered. I don't think it's a matter of hope. I think it's just a matter of time.
I don't think Amazon can allow this show to fail, and it will... Interesting to see what they will do to stop it from failing. Because we noticed, okay, this might be entirely coincidental, but we noticed, I logged on to IMDb to see if anybody had made any reviews, because I wanted to see the score. No reviews. 0 reviews. Interesting.
There's one on Amazon, and it was just negative.
Yeah, there's one review on Amazon. Like, take a look now, if you would please, Kyle. If this may be updated.
I'm going to refresh. After refreshing, there's only one review.
That is weird.
I can't find that review either, by the way. Upon searching to see what the review says, because generally when you write a review on Amazon, it will tell you what the person said or what they thought about it. And it's not visible. We wrote a review too.
Is, Kyle, I saw you write a review, and yet, season 1 review.
Only one. Despite me putting in my own review as well, it hasn't been calculated. I have a feeling that they're censoring this a little bit here, but they've somehow made it fucked up, and one of the bled through. I don't know how.
Because I just checked out again on IMDb's page for Rings of Power. No reviews. Nobody has left a review on this show yet.
This is one of the biggest shows announced this year and is airing right now. And has already aired. Everybody's watched it, had a time to digest it, and not a single person has wrote a review.
Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I'm thinking that Amazon was not particularly fond of the reviews that they got.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And you know what's funny? Their last trailer I saw had over 300,000 dislikes, only like 10,000 or so likes. This is an unmitigated disaster for Amazon. And I don't think they know how to handle it. I think they're panicking. And there's nothing they can do to stop this iceberg from crashing, because it already hit.
I think, like, the best case scenario, because I saw one review in particular which I thought was very interesting. It was a review in a Norwegian newspaper, but for a pre-release, so shill review, but people got access to it. And it started by basically saying, if you like the movies and you like the books, you're not going to like this. And that was all I needed to know. And that is exactly what this is. This does not please the fans of the Rings of Lord of the Rings movies, and it does not please the fans of the books. This is trying to create a different audience, and I don't think they're going to succeed with this bland-ass bullshit.
It's gonna fall face first. I have a little bit of morbid curiosity as to whether Amazon will continue to pursue this as this season continues to bomb, because this train wreck can't be stopped. All the episodes have been recorded. All the episodes, like, they've acted them out. It's too late. They're in the pipe, and they're already shooting the next season. So if they want to fix it, they need to make massive retroactive changes right now. But even so, the damage is done. A first season of this colossal failing, it's like the 1984 Dune movie, where its impact was it bombed so hard, its impact changed the movie industry. I wonder if we'll see that with this show.
Can the ship be turned? I very much so doubt it, if the current writing skills on display is any indication. And so I think this will simply continue, and Amazon cannot allow for it to fail because they put too much money and too much reputation into it. I suspect we're going to be seeing some dirty tricks in the near future.